Welcome to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Charlotte Hall Museum in Prescott, Arizona. My special guest this week is Tim McGill. Tim McGill is the business manager here at Charlotte Hall Museum, and Tim and I have known each other for 42 years going on this summer. So, Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
You know, Tim, it's been great having you here as part of the Charlotte Hall team. You started in December of last year, and you know, our theme of our story today is storytelling. And I thought we'd just take a look back a little bit on storytellers in our lives, why storytelling matters, and why I believe preserving your past and storytelling is important. So we were talking before the show a little bit that we both had fathers who were pretty darn good storytellers.
That is very true. And I think both of our fathers had a lot of life experience to pull from that made for some pretty amazing stories. So
let's start with one of my themes that I like to talk about when I go out and give public addresses. And I like to tell people your story matters. So Tim, you and I met at the Quarter Circle V Bar Ranch summer camp at the Orem School outside of Mayer, Arizona in the summer of 1981. And our paths converged there as young men while we were in college. We didn't know each other before we started that summer in June of 1981. Tell me a little bit about how your trail led you up to the Quarter Circle V Bar Ranch.
Well, I grew up in Scottsdale, and as you alluded to, both of us had amazing fathers. I grew up with a lot of stories about the West, about being a cowboy. My dad was early in his career, was actually a wrangler at a summer camp long ago, and gave me quite a few amazing stories about his time doing that. So when I had a friend who had another friend who had worked at the Quarter Circle V Bar, so he kind of turned me onto it. And said, gosh, you know, there's an opportunity to go up and play cowboy, basically, on a very storied place at the Orem Ranch. And so I jumped at the chance to go up and be a cowboy and even better, help indoctrinate or invite a whole nother generation of little kids to learn about the West and be part of that Western story. So it was kind of a dream come true in a lot of ways.
So who was this friend who told you about Orem Ranch?
A guy named Todd Valls, who you may remember. I grew up down in the Arcadia district, and Todd and I were fast friends from that time together. And so he actually had applied for the job first, and so we both interviewed and got the job together. Unfortunately, Todd had some health problems, and so he bowed out after just the first week or so of training and orientation, but I stuck it out, obviously, and came back for the additional 4 summers. So I was there for 5 summers through college and kind of the beginning of my grad school years.
Right. You know, I had forgotten that Todd was there for part of that summer, and there was always that focus when you start as a camp counselor, and a lot of people had never been there before. I had spent quite a bit of my childhood at the school and the camp, and Todd was one of those counselors that, you know, wished that he had been able to make it through that summer, you know?
Yeah, it was a real shame. He was still is a very talented guy, and he was really gung-ho and excited about it. I was excited to be there with him, but still turned out to be just really a life-changing experience for me.
Right. I think it's interesting that both of our fathers have a little bit of an Irish background and also learned to ride and rope as young men. You know, my dad, Jeb Rosebrook, was sent out to Orem School in 1945 as a 9-year-old. It was like a 1-room schoolhouse, 12 kids, working ranch, and the Orem family basically said, well, we'll raise your children like we raised ours. And so there was a lot of outdoor living and chores and responsibilities. And I know that when we were working there as camp counselors, those were some of the values that we were trained to pass on to the kids.
Well, it was very much an echo of my own upbringing. We were an outdoor family, and my mom could shoot and ride, and she taught me archery as a little kid, and so we were very much an outdoor Western family. And so the opportunity to go up and do that, and as I say, invite the next generation of kids. A lot of the kids, as you know, that came from urban environments and all over the world, literally. And so while you and I were blessed to be in families that had that as part of our upbringing, a lot of those kids didn't. So
that's right. That's exactly
really,
right.
Really, and the cool thing about this, and I'm sure you'll echo this, that a lot of the kids that we knew at like 10 years old are now 30, 40, off with other careers, and it's really neat to stay in touch with those guys and hear from their mouth how life changing that experience was.
Well, and if you really want to put it in context, some of those campers that we had in the summers in the early 80s are now over the age of 50, Tim.
That makes me very old. That's true.
So later this week, we're going to talk about here in another segment here really soon. I'm going to be doing a workshop here at Charlotte Hall Museum called Preserving Your Past, Storytelling at Charlotte Hall Museum. And as we talk about our past, I just thought you said a little bit about, I think you told me at one point your father was from Ohio. I have a grandfather who was from Ohio. And tell me about your mother. Where was your mother from?
Yeah, both of them, my mom and dad met in Oxford, Ohio. They both went to Miami University. They were
famous Ohio University.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And so they met, I think, when they were like 12 or 13. Very different side of the tracks, literally. My dad grew up dirt poor, and in a time when single moms were frowned upon to be single moms. His father, unfortunately, got killed. He was a deputy sheriff, and my grandmother, stubbornly, after she was widowed, kept my dad, and she made it on her own as a school teacher and living through the Depression. My mom grew up in a little bit more well-off family. Her father, my grandfather, was a family doc for the reason, and so the two of them met. The story goes, I heard a lot of stories, that they met at the pool, the local pool, kind of a public pool, and my mom beat my dad very badly in a race in the pool, and so that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
I love that. That is a great story. So we're going to take a quick break here and thank our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about why sharing stories brings friends and families closer together. We'll be right back.
Since 1995, Helkin & Horn Ad Agency has helped local businesses stand out and succeed, from print and radio to websites and social media. You see, their talented team crafts your brand's message and offers a plan to get it out into the community. Do you want results backed by 30 years of experience? Visit AZAD, that's azadagency.com, and do it today. Helkin and Horn, where their slogan is "Be Known."
Welcome back to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Charlotte Hall Museum. My special guest today is Tim McGill, longtime friend. He's also the business manager here at Charlotte Hall Museum in Prescott, Arizona. Before the break, we were having a very interesting conversation about Tim's family, his mother and father's, their roots in Ohio. We learned that they went to college. They grew up in Miami, Ohio. Is that right?
Oxford, Ohio.
And
they went to Miami University. Yep,
thank you very much.
Close.
Now, what's interesting about this is that we learned that Tim's father was raised as an only child by a single mom. Now, what's interesting is my grandfather was born in Cincinnati and raised in Delaware, Ohio. His mother, like your grandmother, so this would be my great-grandmother, my father's grandmother, Fanny Rosebrook, was widowed with 4 children in 1900. Wow. And she didn't remarry either. She moved to Delaware, Ohio from Cincinnati, bought a boarding house for women at Ohio Wesleyan University with her sister, and raised those 4 kids on her own.
Wow.
And put those in all 4 kids and helped each other through college at Ohio Wesleyan. 2 women, two sisters and 2 brothers, graduating from Ohio Wesleyan by around 1920. but it says something about the strong stock of Ohio women,
Right.
and forging their own way, which in many ways at Charlotte Hall Museum, we honor one of those kind of strong women who said, I'm going to clear my own path forward. And Charlotte Hall did not marry, but forged a career in a man's world at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, becoming the first woman here in Arizona to hold any kind of paid position at a political or territorial state level. So some very strong women coming of age in the first part of the 20th century.
True.
Which leads me to part of the reason we're talking today about storytelling. And in an upcoming segment here, Tim, we're going to talk a little bit about you and your career as a storyteller, which I think our audience is going to find very interesting. But what I like about storytelling, my father, Jeb, was a writer and for television and film. He wrote fiction. He wrote plays. He also liked writing journalism. He loved doing profiles of people. And I really never saw him meet a stranger. He really, and he knew how to ask people a little bit about themselves. And my mother, too, as a school teacher. And I'm feeling that your mom and dad were also very good conversationalists and knew how to engage people in a story and learn about them in a good way. And when I go out and do public speaking, and here at Charlotte Hall Museum, we have a very strong oral history program, and I'm very encouraging to audiences to participate in oral history or at home learn how to tell their story. As a historian, we find ourselves through the centuries looking for diaries, looking for documents that tell the stories of the past. Because if without those stories written down, without journalists writing the stories in the newspapers, but without people writing their own memoirs or sharing their family history, our story is not as broad and rich. And so, but there's an interesting thing in the United States, and I was going to ask you this, Tim. Have you found when you've done your storytelling presentations publicly, when you first started doing it, did you feel, a little self-conscious about it?
Yeah, very much so. Because a lot of the stuff that I've done is very much about personal experiences, and that's the whole theme. So, audience may be familiar with the Moth, which is a storytelling hour on public radio, and they have branches all over the country where they have story slams, and it's all very much about personal experience. And so I grew up on stories from my father and my mother about our family history, and it always fascinated me. And it was interesting because particularly my dad, he was a veteran. He served in Guam and Tarawa, World War II, and like a lot of veterans, you really had to pull the stories out of him.
Right.
He was a little bit more stoic about those experiences. But once there was just nuggets there that, I get chills thinking about, literally sitting there and just asking him a lot of questions. And finally you get him going, and he would have this amazing ability to have just a natural story arc. He was reticent to talk about it, but once it got going, it was pretty amazing. So, I was self-conscious when I first started doing it and thinking, who the heck cares about my particular, situation or my background. But I found I love hearing other people's stories that way, and just got a really good response. So I'm working now with an organization here in Prescott over at the Elks Theater called The Stories That Matter. Oddly enough, is what it's called.
What's that again called?
It's called Stories That Matter.
Stories That Matter at the Elks Theater.
Elks Theater.
How many have you done so far?
I've done 3 so far. I'm going to be doing another one on the 28th of this month, and I'll be doing another one in November. And those are all
28th of September.
28th of September, and I can't remember the date on the November one. I'm sorry. That's a cool organization because it is kind of built on the model of the Moth, and it is very much about individual personal experiences. They are true stories as remembered by the teller. And the cool thing over there is they actually hold workshops to help people really craft their stories so that, you know, a lot of times, bluntly, when you're telling a story about some personal experience, unless it's framed in an arc that I think your father and my father had the natural ability to do, it doesn't capture people's attention as much. But I think that's the way I overcame my self-consciousness, I guess, a little bit, is trying to figure out the craft with which to make that personal experience an interesting story to other people.
Right. And I think that's why I have this mantra of your story matters, because within the DNA of America, we've all heard growing up, just put your head down, work hard. No one wants to hear your story. Just, tell the truth, be on time, do your work, and everything will be good. Live by the golden rule, but, don't go around tooting your horn. And, I think that, one thing that, people though yearn for in this era of digital world and AI is reality, real stories about real people. And within families, I try to stress with people the importance of writing those stories down and sharing them with their family. And if they feel that at some point they should be put into an archive or library, like here at Charlotte Hall Museum, or sit down for an oral history, one thing they're doing is they're assuring that the future of history, as historians go to write about the 20th century, it'll be well documented, and not just through newspapers, but the real stories of real people. And an example I'll give was about 7 or 8 years ago, I was in Bandera, Texas, and I was the keynote speaker down there at the Western Trail, Southern Chapter Association. The Western Trail is one of the, also known as the Great Western Trail. There's some controversy on is it the Western Trail or Great Western Trail? But like the Chisholm Trail, two of the most important cattle drive routes from Texas north to Kansas, and the Western Trail eventually went all the way to Montana. It's quite a story. And at one point there were markers, and there are markers along the highways all the way to Montana that shows the route of the Western Trail. Actually, in Taylor Sheridan's 1883, they make that road famous beyond Dodge City. It started from South Texas to Bandera, the great gathering area there, and then north through to Dodge City. But then they kept pushing the cattle further north for all the reasons that cattlemen had markets. So during that weekend with the Texans there, when I was there in Bandera, they would ask you, well, where are you from? And I'd say, well, we're living in Iowa right now, but I grew up in California and Arizona. And they'd look at me and say, well, that's nice. And, our family's been here in Texas since 1820. Or do you know that I'm a member of the Daughters of the Texas Revolution? And I heard quite a bit of that over the weekend. And so when I was giving my keynote address, I turned to everyone and I said, how many of you proud Texans have written down your family's history since 1900, since 1950? I said, at some point, there's going to be some historians and some nonfiction and fiction writers writing the story of Texas between 1950 and 2000, and even 2020. And, but what are they going to use for resources? I said, we might have 100 diaries, maybe, of Texas drovers who drove the cattle drives. And that's all we have. So whose stories are we going to draw from? Your proud Texas history. Whose stories are we going to draw from to write the real history of Texas since 1950?
Well, you're really challenging me. I was reflecting while you were talking there that I have 3 older siblings, and I was struck recently at a family gathering, that I knew more about our parents and our family history than they did. And it's because there was a big gap age-wise between me and my older sister and my brothers. And so I think, in some ways I was kind of like an only child. And so I got a lot more individual time and attention with my folks. And I also just probed a lot more, I think, than they did. So now you're challenging me because I don't think I need to write down those stories.
Yes, you do. Tim Miguel, your story matters.
And more importantly, I think my parents' story matters. Most definitely. And that's a legacy of storytelling we're going to talk about on the next break. So we're going to stop right now and thank our sponsors and come back in just a minute.
For over 45 years, Blind Brothers Arizona has been the heart of window style in Prescott. From blinds, shutters, drapes, they will custom design and install with expert precision, tailored just to you, whether it's for your home or your office. You can trust the name that locals rely on. Visit blindbrothersarizona.com today or call them at 928-776-1845. Once again, that's 928-776-1845 for a free consultation. Blind Brothers Arizona, the original since 1979.
Welcome back to Arizona Roundup at Charlotte Hall Museum with Stuart Rosebrook. And my special guest today is Tim McGill. Tim is a natural-born storyteller following the footsteps of his mother and father. We've heard about that, a little bit about that today. And he's been getting very involved with storytelling here in Prescott at the Elks Theater. And what's the name of the program again, Tim?
It's called Stories That Matter, ironically.
Well, if you're interested in learning how to storytell or write your family history, I'm actually going to be giving a workshop here on the 24th of September called Preserving Your Past, Storytelling at Charlotte Hall Museum. Now, the emphasis of my workshop is kind of an introduction to writing your family history, how to research your family history, why it's important to write it down, how to research it. A lot of people want to write their family history, but they don't have the resources or the basic knowledges. I'm really going to hope to give people some shortcuts, some avenues and some inspiration on how to write their family history. We had a speaker here today, Barbara Ann Waite. She's a published author who was here today, talking about her book, Elsie. And the book she was talking about today was inspired by the story she heard growing up from her grandmother. So we'll see if at the storytelling workshop next week at Charlotte Hall Museum, maybe you will come out here and come to the workshop. Tickets are limited, and you will learn a little bit about how to tell, how to write your family history, how to tell a story. Tickets are $20. You can go online at charlottehallmuseum.org to buy your ticket. But I wanted to talk a little bit about a storyteller that you and I grew up with once we started working at Orem School, someone I knew from my childhood, a man named William S. Buck Hart Jr. And I met Buck when I was probably 6 or 7 or 8 years old. That's maybe the earliest I remember him. But Buck Hart was a legendary camp director. He was also an English teacher, drama teacher. He was the assistant headmaster and headmaster of the Orem School, and a real legend, and also quite a storyteller. Do you think, Tim, today that you maybe have a little bit of storytelling inspiration because of Buck Hart?
Ain't no two ways about it. You knew that was coming. You surprised me with that question, with that, and you kind of warned me that you were going to talk about Buck. Or I didn't know you were going to talk about Buck, but you said somebody, so I guessed. Yeah, Buck was amazing. He was. So I was there as a camp counselor for 5 summers, and he was my prototypical camp director. When I think about a camp director, I think of Buck Hart, and I had the immense privilege of my life to then come back after both you and I had careers away from those summers, and I came back and was able to take over as camp director and try to fill Buck's shoes. Nobody ever could, but every time I was at a campfire, every time I was greeting kids on the first day of that summer session, for those summers that I was there, I was trying my best to live up to Buck's memory and the way he did things. I had the privilege when I took over the camp of going down and having lunch with Buck. He was retired at that point, and I was worried about taking over as a camp director, and that legacy weighed on me, I'll be honest. So I asked his advice, and he said, Tim, the program at Orem and just a good summer camp in general has the 3 Ps. I'll always remember this. Program. I gotta have a good program. I mean, that's kind of a basic. Place, and boy, howdy, Orem had the place. I mean, that was a storied cattle ranch with huge traditions and lots of stories that were really. And his point about that was that sense of place is critically important. But then, last but certainly not least, and I think in my mind, when I think about Buck in the summer camps that he ran, is that the last P was persona. He
right.
said, I played, and this is Buck was telling me that. Look, I was not a natural cowboy originally. This is Buck talking. But I knew that I had to play that part. I needed to be that persona. I needed to be the bigger figurehead that really becomes part of the story of that place. And that really, I thought that was rather profound, and I thought about that a lot. I grew up as a Westerner. I grew up wanting to be a cowboy. I grew up wearing a cowboy hat, but I turned it on that much more because of Buck when I was up there, because I knew that it wasn't about me, but those campers needed a persona that they could fixate on and look to as that a surrogate father figure, and Buck taught me that. And one of the ways that he did that too was he had a phenomenal, as you know, he was a captivating and storyteller that just, I'm sure your memories of him are the same as mine, and that's with the cowboy hat in front of a campfire out in the desert out there and telling stories. And boy, that just emblazons that experience on one's brain.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's interesting about when we talk about storytelling is reflection on who are those major influences in our lives who inspired you as a young person or as an adult. Many of us find our storytellers as I've interviewed a lot of people over time, and many will say that it was a grandparent or maybe a coach or someone that they work for, or a camp director like Buck Hart. And what's interesting about Buck is that he really never knew a stranger. He was a great observer as well. He had an incredible memory. I've always been admired men and women who have such a encyclopedic knowledge of songs and poetry, which he had. And, here in Prescott, every year we have the Arizona Cowboy Poets Gathering, which celebrates that communal atmosphere of storytelling and poetry and cowboy poetry. And you're very right. There was one thing that was celebrated about storytelling that made everybody at some point realize, well, I can do this. And that was the campfire.
Yep.
The Western campfire, which is the heart of maybe one of the Western experiences that people come out to Arizona, come out to when you go camping, and you're outside and you gather at the end of the day. You've had a wonderful day, whether you've been hiking or fishing, or maybe you're in your RV, but you step outside with your family and friends, and you stand around that campfire, and it inspires storytelling. And Buck Hart was a master of that campfire, and we'd have anywhere from 150 to 230 people around that campfire. And, you could hear a pin drop. There was the rules around campfire, but from songs to stories to fables. And one of them, of course, was the legendary Hodag story, which was a two-night story, and of a legendary creature known to travel through the White Mountains on the Mogollon Rim of the Southwest. Buck knew great timing. He had a great memory of people and their names and where they were from, and he would welcome you with a smile and share a story. And we are very grateful for men and women like Buck Hart, who inspired all of us for public service, because he was really also a role model in terms of service above self. He gave, I think well over 40 years to the students and summer campers and families at the Orem School and Corsica V Bar Ranch Camp. And I think that he always also had his kazoo very close by, which is probably, he never was anywhere without his cowboy hat and his boots or his kazoo. And
Well, I think the thing that about the kazoo that it just strikes me, and I think it's true of all good storytellers too, is so here's this rough and tough cowboy figurehead that in a persona that he very carefully curated, but then you'd flip it around at a campfire with this silly kazoo, and the thing that always struck me about that is how brilliant is that you build this persona up of being this rough and tough guy, but it gives kids permission to be goofy and to kind of just put themselves out there, because here's this cowboy out in the middle of the desert around a campfire after, riding horseback for 20 miles on a pack trip, and he pulls out a kazoo of all things and just and does some goofy song, and that what that does is, like I said, it gives permission to kids to go beyond their own kind of limits and put themselves out there. That it's safe. That it
that's right.
I also think about the connection of stories around the campfire. I think that was the beginning of everything. That's the beginning of literature. That's the beginning of there's just something basic in the celebration of the human experience that is what storytelling is all about.
Well, and what's interesting about Buck, and I'll just, before we take our break here, just to share a little bit about Buck, William S. Hart Jr., is that Buck was from West Virginia, and he was, like your father, a veteran of World War II. He served in the Navy across the Pacific, and he and his best friend, this is a story I'll share about Buck, that he shared with me. He and his best friend, Libby Orsini, joined the Navy at the same time, sometime after Pearl Harbor, and they were both sent to the South Pacific. Libby was spent much of his career on different types of ships that were support ship to the Navy, and Buck was separated from his best friend, and he was on a shore patrol that followed the 1st Marine Division across the Pacific. I only heard Buck talk about his service in the Pacific once. It was a very, and so once he shared that with me, you realize when you were with him, there was something behind the twinkle in his eyes. There was something deeper behind those eyes and stories that he found solace in bringing happiness and joy through campfire and storytelling because of what he carried from his veteran experience. But Buck then came back from the war and on the GI Bill, went to Liberty College in West Virginia, and then eventually moved his family and his 2 sons and raised them the Air Dorm School, and the rest is history. But that's part of the ongoing story in terms of storytelling, is also the story behind the story of the man.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's true for my father. I think it's probably true for your father as well. The greatest generation was, they say still waters run deep. There's depth there for sure. And when you find that, if you have the privilege to kind of see behind the veil through some of those stories about their past, it just gives a whole new depth and meaning and kind of gut punches you about what you see on the surface as a jovial and positive person. There's depth there. That's
exactly right. Well, that's a good place to take a break. We're going to come back and talk about storytelling and the upcoming workshop here at Charlotte Hall Museum.
Indeed. Thank you very much. What a wonderful time we're having. And this is a special announcement. Preserving Your Past, Storytelling at Charlotte Hall Museum. And that is coming right up September 24th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Preserving Your Past, Storytelling at Charlotte Hall Museum, and your teacher, your guide, your guest, your writing assistant will be Stuart Rosebrook. Discover the value of personal history as Stuart guides you through techniques for collecting and preserving family stories, including mapping your genealogy, oral history interviewing, and scrapbooking. Whether you're just starting your journey or looking to enhance and improve your own storytelling methods, this workshop will equip you with the tools, strategies, and the inspiration to honor your heritage in some meaningful ways. Stuart has been at this a long time. He received both his master's and doctorates in history, and he is greatly experienced in oral history. He has a passion for tracing his own genealogy and collecting his family stories, in which he most recently discovered a distant relationship to the museum's own founder, Charlotte Hall. I wonder who you might find you're related to. It might be somebody really good. That would be fun, wouldn't it? So please bring at least one personal or family photo to use as inspiration for telling your story.
Welcome back to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Charlotte Hall Museum. And my special guest today is Tim McGill, and we're talking about storytelling, about writing family history, and about the importance of recording your story and sharing it with your family. Tim, we were talking a little bit in the break about family and the depth of personal experiences that people carry with them. And we're also talking a little bit about the Orem Ranch and Quarter Circle V-Bar summer camp. And you said that you've got an upcoming, you're going to be doing a storytelling program over at the Elks Theater here very soon. And but have you thought about, as we've talked today, have you thought about when you're going to start writing down your family history?
You've really challenged me. This conversation, I didn't expect that. But yeah, I feel a responsibility to write some of my family's history. And I think I mentioned before, I was at a gathering with my siblings. Both my parents are passed now, but and my siblings didn't have the same privilege that I did to learn our family history through those stories. And so it was kind of interesting because they were kind of enthralled when I brought up speaking for my dad and for my mom about their history. And you know, we were kind of talking before about, I think that the personal stories and the personal history and the personal testimony that's the thing that brings history to life. You can read about the Depression, but I've got lots of stories of specific experience in the Depression that I think speaks much more poignantly to that history than just reading a history book about, facts and figures.
Right. Well, and I'd like to bring some, when we do this workshop next week, which is 10 to 2, it's going to be here at Charlotte Hall Museum. Over here on the campus, and people can go online to buy the tickets for the workshop, is really trying to help people, inspire them to learn how to do storytelling. We're going to do a lot of nuts and bolts about how to do the research, what questions to ask, and and why they are taking the class. What does this inspire them to come through the door and learn more about storytelling and learn more about writing their family history? On a couple levels, I'll share with you, and I think it'll inspire you to share some stories as well. One reason this is important to me is growing up, we heard lots and lots of stories from my father. My father was a professional writer, and that's how he made his living. So he was always looking forward. He's always looking forward to make the next sale, the next story, the next screenplay or teleplay. And for quite a few years, two of his peers, Earl Hamner, who created the Waltons and wrote many great novels, Spencer's Mountain, Homecoming, and who was a mentor of my dad's, and Max Evans, who was a colleague and also a mentor, wrote, 25, 30 plus books about New Mexico, fiction and nonfiction, just a master storyteller. But both of those men were very comfortable writing their story. They would write it in their fiction, and they would interpret it for Earl Hamner very well interpreted it for television and audiences around the world, the beloved Waltons television series. And but when I started asking my dad to start writing his story, he started writing some vignettes in the 90s, but he really waited a very long time to write his autobiography. And it wasn't his full life story, but it was he used the film Junior Bonner, which was his big break, made here in Prescott, starring Steve McQueen, the story of how he decided to become a writer and how Junior Bonner became a film. but it was the last thing he wrote before he got sick and passed away in 2018. And so one of the things that I draw from as a son of a writer, as a storyteller, and as someone who has known many writers and creative people growing up, is I try to encourage people not to wait too long. Today we have technology, whether it's your phone, you can record people live on video with your phone. You can record it. You can use a recording device. You can write it down. You can use a typewriter. You can do a roadie board like we're here recording this show. And now with AI, you can actually transcribe those long interviews much easier and much faster, so that you can you don't have that fear of going, well, now I've done all these hours. When am I going to sit down and transcribe the hours of my interviews? And so, Tim, I'm encouraging you and I to begin thinking about how you want to record those stories.
Wow.
And we benefit here at Charlotte Hall from our founder, who kind of broke the mold in an era in which it was an era in which women were finding their voice, but it wasn't common. It was uncommon. And we're fortunate that there was enough women from that era writing their stories, writing their opinions and essays. And Charlotte Hall is a role model for that. We sell her. We have a biography of her that we sell at the gift shop. And then if people are looking for, she wrote a whole series of books of poetry, and of course her writing is remarkable. But I think that writing your story or learning how to write your story is also overcoming some of that, our own built-in, we may be shy to toot our horn, but there is something about sharing those stories generationally with your family that I think you've been impacted by, Tim.
Very much so.
And probably just around the dinner table, sharing them with your wife, Susie, and your daughter, Brittany, those stories resonate.
Very much so. And I think that those stories are much like Charlotte Hall and all the other folks that we've talked about. The thing that all of those stories taught me, and I think imparted to my daughter and others in my family, is questions about resilience. It's how those people overcame challenges, and how is that a role model for us?
We're going to take a quick break and then thank our sponsors. We're going to come back to conclude this episode of Arizona Roundup.
At Foothills Bank, they're not just about banking. They're about people, community, and building futures. Whether you're managing personal finances, growing your business, planning for retirement, or buying your dream home, their friendly team is there to guide you every step of the way. Stop by your local Foothills Bank today. It's more than just banking. It's a partnership for success. Foothills Bank is a division of Glacier Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Welcome back to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Charlotte Hall Museum. And my special guest today is Tim McGill, and we're talking about storytelling, about writing family history, and about the importance of recording your story and sharing it with your family. Tim, we were talking a little bit in the break about family and the depth of personal experiences that people carry with them. And we're also talking a little bit about the Orem Ranch and Quarter Circle V Bar summer camp. And you said that you've got an upcoming, you're going to be doing a storytelling program over at the Elks Theater here very soon. And but have you thought about, as we've talked today, have you thought about when you're going to start writing down your family history?
You've really challenged me. This conversation, I didn't expect that. But I feel a responsibility to write some of my family's history. And I think I mentioned before, I was at a gathering with my siblings. Both my parents are passed now, but and my siblings didn't have the same privilege that I did to learn our family history through those stories. And so it was kind of interesting because they were kind of enthralled when I brought up speaking for my dad and for my mom about their history. And we were kind of talking before about, I think that the personal stories and the personal history and the personal testimony that's the thing that brings history to life. You can read about the Depression, but I've got lots of stories of specific experience in the Depression that I think speaks much more poignantly to that history than just reading a history book about, facts and figures.
Right. Well, and I'd like to bring some, when we do this workshop next week, which is 10 to 2, it's going to be here at Charlotte Hall Museum over here on the campus, and people can go online to buy the tickets for the workshop, is really trying to help people, inspire them to learn how to do storytelling. We're going to do a lot of nuts and bolts about how to do the research, what questions to ask, and and why they are taking the class. What does this inspire them to come through the door and learn more about storytelling and learn more about writing their family history? On a couple levels, I'll share with you, and I think it'll inspire you to share some stories as well. One reason this is important to me is growing up, we heard lots and lots of stories from my father. My father was a professional writer, and that's how he made his living. So he was always looking forward. He's always looking forward to make the next sale, the next story, the next screenplay or teleplay. And for quite a few years, two of his peers, Earl Hamner, who created the Waltons and wrote many great novels, Spencer's Mountain, Homecoming, and who was a mentor of my dad's, and Max Evans, who was a colleague and also a mentor, wrote, 25, 30 plus books about New Mexico, fiction and nonfiction, just a master storyteller. But both of those men were very comfortable writing their story. They would write it in their fiction, and they would interpret it for Earl Hamner very well interpreted it for television and audiences around the world, the beloved Waltons television series. And but when I started asking my dad to start writing his story, he started writing some vignettes in the 90s, but he really waited a very long time to write his autobiography. And it wasn't his full life story, but it was he used the film Junior Bonner, which was his big break, made here in Prescott, starring Steve McQueen, the story of how he decided to become a writer and how Junior Bonner became a film. But it was the last thing he wrote before he got sick and passed away in 2018. And so one of the things that I draw from as a son of a writer, as a storyteller, and as someone who has known many writers and creative people growing up, is I try to encourage people not to wait too long. Today we have technology, whether it's your phone, you can record people live on video with your phone. You can record it. You can use a recording device. You can write it down. You can use a typewriter. You can do a roadie board like we're here recording this show. And now with AI, you can actually transcribe those long interviews much easier and much faster so that you can you don't have that fear of going, well, now I've done all these hours. When am I going to sit down and transcribe the hours of my interviews? And so, Tim, I'm encouraging you and I to begin thinking about how you want to record those stories.
Oh, wow.
And we benefit here at Charlotte Hall from our founder, who kind of broke the mold in an era in which it was an era in which women were finding their voice, but it wasn't common. It was uncommon. And we're fortunate that there was enough women from that era writing their stories, writing their opinions and essays. And Charlotte Hall is a role model for that. We sell her. We have a biography of her that we sell at the gift shop. And then if people are looking for, she wrote a whole series of books of poetry, and of course her writing is remarkable. But I think that writing your story or learning how to write your story is also overcoming some of that, our own built-in, we may be shy to toot our horn, but there is something about sharing those stories generationally with your family that I think you've been impacted by, Tim.
Very much so.
And probably just around the dinner table, sharing them with your wife, Susie, and your daughter, Brittany, those stories resonate.
Very much so. And I think that those stories are much like Charlotte Hall and all the other folks that we've talked about, the thing that all of those stories taught me, and I think imparted to my daughter and others in in my family, is questions about resilience. It's how those people overcame challenges, and how is that a role model for us?
We're going to take a quick break and then thank our sponsors. We're going to come back to conclude this episode of Arizona Roundup. Welcome back to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Charlotte Hall Museum. And my special guest is Tim McGill. And we've had a great afternoon here talking about family history, storytelling, growing up on the Quarter Circle V Bar Ranch as young men, as camp counselors there, serving as camp counselors with young men and women from around the world. And it's true, we both ended up there raising our families at the school and working at the school 20 years later. And I thought I'd share a little story about my interest in family history and a professor. You're talking about a mentor that you had, and it's going to lead us a little Q&A here back and forth between us here on storytelling. So freshman year at Wake Forest University, I grew up in North Hollywood, California. I'd gone to Notre Dame High School. It was a boys' Catholic school at the time. It's now co-ed. And I was inspired to go to school in North Carolina because my father had gone to school at Washington and Lee and had spent all his summers on a family farm near Charlottesville. Now, going to college at Wake Forest, I knew I was going to be a history major from day one. In my first history class, Western Civ, 1700 to the present. You've been trained in high school on how to write a history paper. I'm sure you had a few history papers you had to write in high school, right? By the way, do you remember who you wrote about in maybe your U.S. history class? Did you have to? You went to Phoenix Country Day School?
Went to Phoenix Country Day School. I remember freshman year, it was a college preparatory school, so they were big on writing. Ironically, it was Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's great. That shows just a little difference between you and I. You wrote about Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. I decided to write about James Polk.
Oh, wow.
The President Polk. And so to this day, I'm a big President Polk fan, somewhat controversial, not as famous as John F. Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. But what's interesting about this history class is we all expected we were going to write one of those big papers in college about the French Revolution or Bismarck or, maybe the American Revolution, but, more of a traditional story. Well, the first day of class, Dr. J. Howell Smith walks in and he said, you may be thinking that you're going to be writing a major research paper here on this topic of 17 Western Civ, but instead you may notice the small book that you purchased at the bookstore on family history. And why do I have in Western Civ this little book about family history? He said, that's because each of you is going to write your family story as your major paper of this semester. And the reason why is I want each of you to understand what it took for you to sit in this classroom, in this seat today in September 1981. How did you get to Wake Forest University here today? And so we're going to teach you a little bit about doing genealogy, about doing family history. But more important, you're going to write all of your living relatives, and you're going to learn how to interview them and ask them questions about family life, about their story, about their families. And so all those students were there and, nodding their heads. And as we went through the semester, he emphasized, but I don't want you just to ask the big questions, the easy questions. So some of the things that we learned to ask were about the mundane little pieces of life. So, Tim, if you can remember, did your mom like to bake?
She did not, but her mom did. And I think it was kind of a rebellion because her mom was a famous baker in kind of their local community. Had one of those big vats.
In Oxford?
Oxford, Ohio. She had one of those big bins that would pull out in her kitchen. that was just full of flour, because she just would use 50-pound bags of flour like you can't imagine. So I think my mom kind of rebelled against that, and her idea of food was making reservations. But I can. But there's, I mean, to your point, I think there's lots of little things about both of my parents, and likewise when I try to tell stories, it's about the little. A lot of times, the smaller your focus on a person or persona or an event, that a lot of times those smaller focuses will really bring out the bigger picture better than just facts and figures.
Right. So I'm going to circle back though. You didn't answer my question. So did your mom bake cookies when you were growing up?
She did.
Right. So what was the favorite cookie your mom would bake? On a
Clearly, it was a chocolate chip.
Chocolate chip cookie. There we go. Now let's jump. So what about on the holidays? So was Thanksgiving a big deal at your mom and dad's house?
Thanksgiving was definitely a big deal. And so, yeah, and that would be the one time that my mom would cook, and big turkey, all that kind of stuff. Right.
So did she cook the turkey inside?
She did.
Yeah. So, and who made the pies?
That's a good, interesting question. So sometimes it'd be her, but a lot of times the kids would get involved.
Yeah. So do you have a memory of, what was the best pie your mom would make annually at Christmas or Thanksgiving?
Clearly, apple, and actually more ironically, the bigger experience, and the one that actually tickles my olfactories right now, is the mashed potatoes, believe it or not.
Mashed potatoes are huge at our house as well.
They were big.
Yeah. So, sometimes just those little mundane questions about day-to-day life. And I had that conversation with someone recently who's written a lot about her life growing up as a camper and as a student at the Orem School. And I said, well, have you ever written just about your day-to-day life at the school? She's like, well, I've written about all these people and being a milker or being on Roundup, but I don't know. She said, I don't know. Sue Farron told me, she said, I don't know if I've written just about when the bell rang in the morning, what a day's life as a student at Orem School was in 1958.
Really brings it to life if you do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So never overlook the mundane in your storytelling. And I think that's one of the things that Dr. Smith emphasized at Wake Forest is when you write your relatives in those days, you did not get on the phone and talk for people for hours on the phone because it was expensive. So you wrote letters. So I have one thing I do have from that experience in writing the family history is I have all the notes back from my one grandparent was alive, a series of great aunts and uncles and my parents in their handwriting.
Wow.
And one of the things when we'll conclude here this story is learning kind of how to open up that door and let the door sit there. Or, if you're young and you're trying to learn how to do storytelling, what's difficult is the follow-up. So I had, and I don't know if you've experienced this with some family members, but I had a great aunt who was the last of the Fallon sisters. My grandmother was a Fallon from the Bronx. And I was getting these long letters back from my aunts on the Fisher side and some of my great aunts on the Rosebrook side. And so I sent a series of questions very similar to Aunt Eve. She was the baby of the family. And her answers came back in one sentences. I said, what was it like being in New York in the 1920s? Noisy, very noisy. And so sometimes learning how to interview somebody is learning when to open the door and let it sit there, or how to follow back up. If in the first interview you have to gain a sense of when to let the person end the story or let them come back to it if they're feeling uncomfortable about it. Have you found that in the interview processes before?
Yeah, very much so. And I think, again, back to talking to my mom and my dad about their background, and it was just intuitive as a kid, asking questions. But I think to your point, it's like, particularly when I was talking to my dad about his war experiences, I wanted to feel what it was viscerally like to live in a Quonset hut on Tarawa, while the Japanese they were still clearing out the Japanese. And to your point, it was kind of the follow-up questions. Like, okay, what was it like living there? What was in hot, cold? What did you have? Mosquitoes? did you take a shower? Those follow-up questions is how I found out that my dad couldn't take a shower because they didn't have running water for that, but they had monsoon seasons, and so it would rain every day like clockwork at 4:00. So the funny story that came out of that I think just brought to life what that was like was, famously, he got all sudsed up one day and was out there, kind of the last guy out on the beach trying to get a shower with everybody else, and sure enough, the rain stopped. And so it was 24 hours all sudsed up, and I guess took a lot of abuse from his friends there in the service. But it's those little nuances, it's those little kind of flavorful pieces that fill out the real story of what that experience was like.
So let's leave people with a little flavor. So when you were a Orem summer counselor at Quarter Circle V Bar Ranch, and can you tell me the name of your favorite horse and why?
Oh, ain't no two ways about it. Luna. Luna was assigned to me for the last couple of years I was there during the summertime, and what they didn't tell me was the wrangler that you'll remember, a guy named now I can picture him, I can't remember him, but
Harley Cox?
Harley Cox, thank you very much. So Harley told me on the second year that I had this horse, because she was great, but she would rear on me all the time, and so and I said, Harley, why'd you give me this horse that just rearing all the time, and it's a real problem? And he thought it was funny. I never told you. Her last name was Tick. Her full name is Luna Tick. And he just thought that was hilarious. But she was a great horse. She and I had a lot of disagreements, but ultimately I wouldn't have traded her for anything. So, and you're right. I mean, I think every time I talk to a kid 20 years later that was at Orem or any of the camps, I've also been in other outdoor centers, they always remember the horse.
That's right. All right. So the next time you're going to come back on here, we're going to have a session on horses in our lives.
I would love to. Yeah, I've got some great stories about that for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Tim, thanks for being part of the Arizona Roundup today at Charlotte
you.
Hall Museum.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
You bet. And come on out to Charlotte Hall Museum. Go online to charlottehallmuseum.org and sign up for storytelling workshop Wednesday, September 24th with Stuart Rosebrook here, and we're going to learn how to do storytelling and how to research your family history. All right. Thank you very much here on Arizona Roundup.